Hi everyone, for Ludum Dare 40 I worked with a friend to create Splotch 2, a puzzle game where you draw lines to try bounce the balls into their gates as speedily as possible. The original Splotch is something I created a few years back for a mini Ludum Dare. We both really liked the core mechanic of the game and wanted to take it further in this game jam. I began by creating the bouncing ball just with Unity's built-in 2D physics. I added a trail renderer to it, but was a bit disgusted by the way it looked when it intersected with itself. I found a neat solution for this online though, which is to take a simple transparent shader such as this one, turn on Z writing so that the shader writes to the depth buffer, and then set Z test to less. These are the settings that a regular opaque shader uses to ensure that objects in the foreground get drawn on top of objects in the background. Applied to the trail shader, no more ugly overlapping. I then turned to the core gameplay mechanic of drawing lines. In the original, lines were drawn in a raised freehand, which was kind of neat, but of course a bit of a nightmare to make minor adjustments to the bounce angle. This time, we decided to just use straight, editable lines, which made the game a lot easier to control, and thus opened the possibility for much more intricate and interesting level designs. This is what my friend Liam was hard at work at.
As a baseline for the difficulty of the game, I began by sketching out the first level, which contained a single ball and an exit gate. In designing this level, I tried to make it clear that there's an easy but slow route going over the top, and then these more challenging alternate routes for the faster times. In later levels, I wanted the quickest route to be less obvious, so I introduced a pair of portals. Now the player has to consider which end to enter from, as well as which ball to send through, since the portals can only be used once. When I had some different layouts on paper, I began drawing them in Photoshop. Once done, I imported them into Unity as sprites and added a polygon collider. Sebastian had different elements set up as prefabs, so for example, I could drag 2 balls, 2 gates and a key into the scene, set up their colors and their level be ready to play. After that, I did lots of testing and tweaking to try to get the difficulty right. The aim was to make the game beatable in roughly half an hour, but to leave room for optimizing one's routes after the first playthrough.
While all this was going on, I was trying to get the leaderboards up and running. For my past entries, I've used a free service called Dreamlow, but this time I wanted to try set it up myself. I began by purchasing a domain from HostGator and creating a database there with columns for name and score. While I'd never written any PHP before this jam, with Google as my guide, it was relatively painless to set up a simple test system where I could submit and download entries from within Unity. Later on, I of course looked into protecting against SQL injections, and also added an ID column, which I set with systeminfo.unique device identifier. That way, a person's score is tied to their device instead of a username, which of course might be shared by multiple people. Now, there are obviously multiple ways one could go about uploading a fake score, and the only way to convincingly protect against all of them would be to record where the player has placed their lines for a given level, and then upload that data along with their score. I could then have a special instance of the game running physics simulations on everyone's input to verify that their solutions actually work. Unfortunately, since the physics ended up not being fully deterministic, I didn't want to risk rejecting legitimate entries, and so had to drop that idea. Next up, I created a simple menu with a level select screen, leaderboards, some basic options, and instructions. For the game's aesthetic, we'd been toying with inverting the level colors from the original, but at the last moment we decided to switch back to the white background and black foreground. With this change, my trail render was suddenly no longer showing up. Submission hour rapidly approaching, I sort of panicked and threw on a simple unlit shader, which of course got rid of the nice fade out at the end of the trail. What I needed to do, however, was simply change the blend mode on this one line over here. Oh well, you can look forward to nice trails in Splotch 3. In review, I think the game's main shortcoming is the lack of determinism in the physics. While testing, the physics seems to behave perfectly, and yet it will mess up every now and again during the game. I haven't yet been able to pinpoint exactly what's going on here, but I'll keep looking into it. Another glaring problem is the lack of an undo command for when you accidentally mess up one of your lines. In spite of these problems though, I think it's still a pretty fun game, and I hope you'll give it a try and let us know what you think. Until next time, cheers.